Good
Okay.
evening, everybody, and welcome to our latest Picturehouse 441 event. My name is Joshua Handler. I'm the co-founder and lead programmer for Picturehouse 441. It is my pleasure to welcome Wendy Greene Bricmont, editor of Annie Hall, to join us this evening. Wendy, thank you for being here. I'm just delighted that we get to explore my favorite film of all time this evening.
It's great to be here. It's great to revisit it in my mind after so many years.
It's amazing rewatching this film just how fresh it is, and we'll get into that in one moment. I just want to make a big thank you to our supporting partners year round, the American Cinema Editors, the Baton Rouge Film Commission, and the Dallas Film Commission. We are always grateful for your friendship and support, and cont love to continue working with you. And also apologies, and via Glenview, we are thrilled to be working with you guys this evening too. Um, so Wendy, you just told me that you rewatched the film fairly recently. Was it yesterday, the day before?
No, no, it was last week
It was last
when I
week.
thought, oh my gosh, a week until and it was last week.
It was last week. Okay, so tell me, what was it like revisiting the film for the first time in a little bit? What popped back into your mind? Was there anything new that you noticed or that you were like, "Oh, I forgot about that." I'd love to hear your thoughts.
There was really nothing that I had forgotten about per se. It was just sort of reliving how we got to the various places. I think that that was because it was such a unique journey. Certainly for me, I was very young. Ralph and I had worked on two projects together. He hired me to do a PBS as assistant editor on a PBS special, Bernice Bobs Her Hair, starring Shelley Duvall. And then we did The Great Bank Hoax, which was a picture that he produced. And so we were working on both of those. We came to Annie Hall late, and a lot of the footage was already shot. And so mostly I remember the first dailies that I ever saw. And when I saw this scene again, which was the Dwayne bedroom scene, and I saw this at the lab because we were catching up as we went. And it was just amazing to me being 27 and seeing Woody do this scene because every time he came in and sat down, and Christopher Walken, you know, bounced him with I need to turn my wheel into the fire, and we kept Woody's reaction would be different every single time. He had lived something every single time, and I thought, boy, this is going to be a fun ride. So it was that kind of remembering the freedom we had and the complete autonomy that he had as a director. It was really special. So it was just like seeing it, almost new again, but knowing it by heart.
It's amazing that you had that much autonomy and that he was able to. I assume he had final cut on the film, correct?
Oh, he did. And he didn't need to show it to the producers or anybody until he was ready.
When did the producers first see the film? Was it
At
during?
the end,
Oh wow, so it had gone through all of its iterations
it
and then it was
had.
shown to them.
It had. I mean, they had talked about the proposed title of Anadonia and freaked out about it. And Marshall had seen it. He had come to the cutting room, but Woody didn't show it to my mind, to my memory. He didn't show it to any of the producers, Jack Rollins, no one, until we had really worked through it quite a bit.
That's amazing that he had that kind of autonomy and that the producers were able to obviously trust him enough to do that. I know that he had, a decade plus of great films prior to this, but
Right.
that's a remarkable thing, and it's such a rarity nowadays to, hear about a filmmaker who doesn't even have to show their work to to their producers.
I mean, I was so young. This was my first film editing credit at the back end. And I was so young and had so little experience. I thought this is the way all movies were made. You know, sadly, I was wrong.
It must have been crazy working like this the first time. You would
Yeah, it was great.
I'd read an interview with you and you would describe the experience as the editing room as being quote unquote homey. which I thought was such a beautiful way to describe it. I've never heard an editing room described as homey before.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever been in an editing room as homey. Well, it was Ralph's home. It was in his brownstone on West 84th Street. So we were in a room across from he and Davita's bedroom. So it was very homey, but it was low drama. There was no real drama. We just really worked through it. It's very quiet, thought, it was just a very controlled process.
Well, speaking of drama, when it was realized that the original iteration of this film was not really working, the original vision for this was not really working, was there any moment of panic between you, Ralph, Woody, anybody else working on this film, or is it just okay, well, we have to do something about this?
Oh, I think there were probably, I'm not even sure that I was old enough to recognize it. Um, there was an interesting process that just to go back a little bit, Ralph cut on a moviola and he didn't splice. He clipped the cuts together. And then we gave them to Sandy Morse, who spliced it together. And then the picture went onto the scene bed, the flatbed, and that's what I ran. And so that's kind of when Ralph and Woody were sitting behind me looking at it. And I think to my memory, it was apparent quite early on that Woody and Diane's relationship just jumped off the screen. So the original intent of it to be about this neurotic New Yorker who could never sustain relationships, once we kind of realized that, then we began sort of studiously trying to remove hysterical things, but he, lift things to just make her be the focus of the movie. And there were things that we had to let go of that were just so funny and so amazing, but they didn't keep the movie. It was just becoming a different movie, and we had to have a different focus. So those things. And his ability to drop things was amazing, even to me at that early stage. He was ruthless. It was great. And once again, I thought, oh, this is how it always is. But not so much with writer directors.
Do you know where that ruthlessness about Woody's work came from? Like, w was that something that came from his work in comedy, or
I
where did
think
that come
so.
from?
I think it definitely, I think it came from being a stand-up comedian because I also worked with Chris Rock later in my career. And I think they work their material so hard and really drop things and alter things with a plum that I think a lot of people don't have experience doing. And so I think that allowed, I mean, there are bits that were pulled out, and Woody would say, "Well, we'll use this. I'll just put that in the drawer, and we'll use it some other time, something else." So there were those situations when he goes over to Diane's house for the spider. That was a skit that he had written for Candice Bergen with Marshall. That was supposed to be a divorced couple, but they used it in Annie Hall. So there is, I think, a discipline that comes from being a stand-up comedian.
That's so funny that I mean, that's one of the best scenes of the film when he says there's a spider in here the size of a Buick or whatever he
One
compares.
gorgeous master that's held and moves around. I mean, there's not a lot of cutting in that master.
I'm so glad that you bring that up because there are so many scenes. It struck me when rewatching this, specifically looking at it from an editorial perspective. There are so many scenes that are just shot in one great, beautiful master. Early on, there's that great shot of them walking down 66th Street where he's talking about how he sees anti-Semitism everywhere, like Jew eat and things like that. Were any of those covered in any way, or were they always intended to be shown in master?
Well, let me think about that. That was, it was a bit ago. For the most part, I think they believed in the way they set up these masters. Gordon Willis was, just wonderful. And I think that they just trusted the choreography, the blocking, and I don't think there was a lot of coverage. No. I mean, to hold a master as long as Woody held so many masters in Annie Hall, it's just not done these days very much.
And you use the word choreography. I mean, the choreography of that shot of them, you don't even know where they're coming from when they're walking down 66th Street. I mean, they stop the scene. The camera moves back a little bit to accommodate them, and that's it. I mean, they hit their mark so
Then they just go
perfectly,
by.
and then they just go right by, and then you cut to when they're outside the Beekman.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, today, if I saw a shot like that, I'd be immediately nervous. Where's the coverage? Because we're going to be in trouble. Nobody's going to be patient enough for this. But, there were great jokes all the way down and just very character revealing dialogue. So, yeah, it was admirable.
You had talked about deleted scenes, about scenes that were taken out that were hysterical, and that leads into a question that we have from Mark in our audience, who says it's known that Annie Hall had many deleted scenes. Can you describe one or two scenes which you remember but just didn't fit in the final released version?
Oh, yes, for sure.
Take it
Those,
away.
well, there was the invasion of the element where an African American family moves into Brooklyn, and it was set up like Invasion of the Body Snatchers with people pulling down their shades. It was hysterical, but it didn't have anything to do with what we were sort of going for at that time. There was a scene with Shelley Duvall, who played Pam in the movie, and Woody in the Garden of Eden. And they were creating man and woman, and Woody was talking to God and saying, when you do this, don't put the sexual organs too close to the excretory ones because it'll be a problem later. I mean, it was just funny, audacious stuff. There were, the kids in school were much more embellished, going home with Donald, having him watch, TV, and Woody making comments. There were so many good ones that just had to go, Um, trying to think if there were more that I remembered. Um, yeah, they were just funny, but they just didn't fit.
Oh, that makes sense. Well, let me ask you, the Invasion of the Body Snatchers one with the African Americans, where did that originally fit into
Well, it was
Anadonga?
Well, it was when he was visiting Coney Island and talking about his experiences. And it was in black and white. And there were titles made for it, boom, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So I mean it was a whole thing. And it was fun. It just was very funny. But by then we knew, I mean, those were in there for a while, but you just felt like, why are we here? Besides we were laughing, but we didn't completely understand, things like that.
All right, so let's take a step out of this for one moment. I want to go into the broad overview of this film before we go into more of the specifics. First of all, when did you first read this screenplay? What were your initial thoughts on it? How it would
I
be
never read the
executed?
screenplay.
Oh,
I just
really?
rolled right into it with Ralph because I had done 2 pictures with him ahead. So I never read the screenplay before I started working on the movie.
Okay, so you never read the screenplay. Where did you begin work with Ralph on this? You said that you got to it while they were in production. Did he put together an assembly? Did you put together an assembly? Did you collaborate on an assembly? What happened?
Ralph put together the assembly. That's when he would work on the moviola, as I said, clip it together, and then it would be spliced, and then we would go on to the Steenbeck and start to look at the picture. And because they had started shooting it ahead, we had a lot to catch up on, so we could look at the overall picture.
What did the overall picture look like when that first assembly was put together? Can you tell us about that? Because I mean, I have some semblance of an idea based on what I've read, but I would love to hear, and I know our audience would love to hear too, some more details about that overall picture.
I think it was completely enjoyable. I think that we laughed all the way through because the bits were wonderful and they were shot so well and acted so well. But I think at the end it was like, we came to this. I don't think it was like a light bulb going off, and once again, this was my first film editing credit. I didn't have a lot to compare it to. Um, I think it was like, what is this? What is this animal? And, it sort of digressed and went here, went there. And it was like, well, what do we have here? And I think that's when the hard work started. And conversations between Woody and Ralph and me and Sandy Morris, who was our apprentice, it was an interesting process.
Was there any specific moment where it was decided we need to refocus this film entirely on the Diane and Woody thing? Was there like one moment, or was there a conversation, like, or was it just you guys chipping away at this and it revealing itself to you?
No, I think it was a conversation. It wasn't like a light bulb, I can't say Woody walked in one day and said, I figured it out. I don't think it was like that. I think it was quite a few conversations that were had saying, well, this doesn't work because it's not alive when she's not on screen. And we don't really care about these other relationships, that he couldn't sustain with people that we just didn't care about and weren't at the level of Keaton, obviously.
I mean, her performance in this film, I mean, what else is there to say? I mean, there were so many indications that she was great prior to this. I mean, Love and Death, the films that they did together prior to this. But it's amazing to see the depth that she brings to this now supremely iconic character.
It was wonderful. And also, I didn't know that she sang. So it was wonderful to, have those scenes in the movie. And they were by this time not, to my knowledge, not a couple in real life. So that was pretty interesting, sort of the balance of that. But he thought she was marvelous and he wanted to stay on her as much as he could.
And I think you hit on it right there. One of the things that is so beautiful about this film, the obvious love that he has for her as a fellow artist. The spotlight is so rarely on him when she's in the scene. He focuses so much of it on her, gives her the best dialogue. He'll throw a joke in for himself here and there, but she really gets the meat of every scene that she's in.
That's correct. And I mean, he was effusive in his praise. He thought she was straight up marvelous and knew that um, it was worth being on her.
Absolutely. And I mean it certainly paid off in every respect.
Yeah, for a lot of them, 4 Academy Awards.
I know it's amazing that the only one it didn't win was Best Actor for him. But I think
Yeah,
he probably he cleaned up anyway. So I think that was all right for him.
that's right. I think it
Um,
was fine.
and especially given his seeming disinterest in any kind of awards, as he admits in the film. All they do is give out awards.
That's right. Yeah, no,
Um,
he didn't show up.
that's so funny.
He didn't love LA. I mean, I moved to LA the year after Annie Hall in 1977, and I remember when we were talking on the phone when I was out here, he just kept saying, "Why do you want to move there? The sun is so bright. It's horrible. Don't go there." But I wanted to, it worked for my life at that point.
And obviously that paid off as well, given the immense amount of wonderful films you've cut over the past
So
48
thank
years
you.
since this one. Speaking of relationships, you and Ralph, I'd love to dig into how you two worked together. Andrew from our audience was wondering how the work was divided up between you two, and I would love to know about what was it about your sensibilities and maybe your personalities that made you such a good fit together over the course of the projects that you worked on.
Well, he was a very, I mean, he was a really talented editor, and I was pretty much in awe of him. And really, our first experience was Bernice Bobs Her Hair. And on that, the crew, Paul Gurian had introduced me, a producer, had introduced me to Ralph. And he was a teacher also. He was a mentor. And he would throw things at you and give you responsibilities and comment on it, and you learned a lot that way. I think in the final credits for Bernice, I was assistant editor and a sound editor, which I can't even remember how it turned out to be that way, but it was like, really? Oh, all right. um, it was interesting. But on Annie Hall it was different because Woody was such a, I was in awe of him, and I think we just kind of felt our way around on that. Woody was very shy with me for the first couple of days, because he was shy, and then once we all got comfortable with one another, but he was very comfortable with Ralph, obviously, because they had done so much together. So Ralph took the lead in, making everybody in the room feel comfy, um, cozy, sort of. And he also had a dialogue with Woody and a history.
You mentioned that that Ralph was an educator. David from our audience has a wonderful question. He says that he took Ralph's editing class, which he taught through the New School at his brownstone on the Upper West Side, which was incredible. He said that Leonard Maltin was also a student in the class. He was wondering about and says that he actually worked with Marshall Brickman on Lovesick. He was wondering if you could talk about the working dynamic between Woody and Marshall on Annie Hall.
Well, not completely, because Marshall wasn't in the cutting
Yeah,
room
yeah.
and I wasn't involved, as they were writing the script. I know when Marshall came in and saw it, that was that was a day, because it was like, once again, what is this? Because what they had what they had written about this neurotic character, it just it wasn't that. And but they knew each other so well and so were so comfortable with each other that I think that I don't have a memory of Marshall being in the cutting room a lot. Maybe they had dialogue other places, but there wasn't a lot of dialogue with Marshall in the cutting room at that point.
What do you said that when Marshall saw the first cut of the film, that was a day, and I see you smiling now, so there must be a good story there. I would love to hear about your recollections of when Marshall first saw the film.
he, I think he was appalled. I think he was, shocked. Um, I think he was pleased to see the Woody Keaton character come alive, but I think he was very worried about how we had everything in there. We had every bit. And I think he was worried about how we were going to shape it. I think he was, I mean, when people see first cuts, a lot of times they're shell shocked anyway, but this was big shell shock.
I can't even imagine what that must have been like to pour so much time, effort, love, passion into something and then see it turn out a little differently than what you'd hoped it would be.
Well, you got to get used to it, because that does it on every film, not to the degree that Annie Hall did. I mean, the fluidity, the elasticity, the ability to transpose things, to lose things, as painful as it was, it just doesn't happen on every film at all.
Speaking of
And,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
there were also, in terms of the problem solving, and this is one of the only times I've experienced this, when we would come up against a big problem, he would say, we're smart people. We can figure this out. And he would allow silence in the cutting room where we just thought, and there would be silence for a long time. And then someone would come up with an idea, somebody else would mention something, but I thought that was so brilliant, and it is so rare. People are very uncomfortable with silence. They need to fill the air. And yet sometimes you just have to sit and think. I don't think necessarily that was the day Marshall came in, but it was other times. Um, it was impressive.
That's really fascinating because I've rarely heard about quiet, quiet cutting rooms when the director is in.
Right.
Let me ask you about that. When he called for silence and let you and Ralph and whomever else was in the room think, do you remember any specific ideas like light bulb moments that happened out of those silences?
Honestly, Joshua, I don't.
That
You
is
know,
perfectly okay. That is perfectly okay. Your recollections of a film that you cut almost 50 years ago are incredible. So if this is the thing you don't remember, don't worry.
I don't. I wish it was, I wish I had a light bulb moment, but the silence was a light bulb moment to me as an editor, as a young editor, and learning to be an editor, because we could do with more silence these days, to my mind.
Is
Um,
is that something that you've taken into other editing rooms that you've been in?
I've tried to, I've talked to certain directors about it, and yeah, I think it's something that our schedules are compressed. The autonomy that Woody Allen had at that moment on that picture, it's hard to replicate, certainly through the years. But I've talked about it, and certain directors have appreciated it more than others.
Absolutely. Something that was interesting, I believe it was in an interview with Ralph, or maybe it was from his book. It was from somewhere where he was talking about how Woody cut much of the first 20 minutes of the film out very quickly. Is that correct?
That is correct.
What did
Yes.
those first 20 minutes look like? I'd love to hear about that.
Well, I think that to my mind, there were a fair amount of the gags in there, but it was like Keaton appeared and then she disappeared for, 10 or 15 minutes. And that didn't work once we realized that this was going to be a relationship movie. And so I think a lot of the voiceover changed. I mean, obviously at the end it did. It was just clear that we had to focus it.
From our audience, Owen was wondering if you have any specific examples of editorial choices you made on this film. Anything that you're particularly proud of or that you remember.
That's a good question. I might have to think about that for a little bit.
That is
Let me
perfectly
get back
fine.
to you, Owen.
Please do, please do. Deborah from our audience, and Andrew had a similar question. Deborah says, I've heard that Woody Allen always goes back for planned reshoots. Did that happen with Annie Hall?
Oh.
And then I'll get to the second part of the question after we hear the answer to this.
Well, this was also something that was very new to me that we knew from the very beginning until he saw the assembly. He really didn't know how the movie would end. And you can underline that, that was, you're not kidding. So, being a writer, director, actor, he reshot 3 times to try and get the ending, pick up the ending. And really, the scene in the rehearsal room was, of course, the last one. But it took at that point, the crew would reassemble. They always knew they were going to. These were kind of low budget movies at a certain point. He would go write, they'd shoot, we'd cut it, it wouldn't work. I can't even remember all the endings until really he got to that one. So probably 3 different reshoots before we knew what the end would be. The right tone for it. I mean, we knew what would happen to the characters, but just the right tone.
I know you said you can't recall all of the endings, but do you remember any of the other endings that were shot or that you placed in before we ended up with the final one?
I really don't
That's
know.
perfectly okay. Deborah says, what kind of time frame for primary shooting, screening, and then reshoots did you have? Could you talk to us about the workflow and schedule and compare and contrast to today, and how you work today?
Well, once again, being, new in this position, we were never really rushed. The preview process was very controlled. He didn't do previews like we do now, recruited previews. We had a week of screenings at Magno's, screening room where scenes would come in and go out. I mean, at one point, Dwayne was dropped, and I was like, beside myself, making arguments in the bedroom because I thought it was just such a great scene. Um, but it all moved pretty quickly. There wasn't a lot of dawdling, but it was not. We didn't have a schedule. No one told us where we had to be at any particular point. But we worked on it from probably, well, I mean, it was shot in they started in May of 76, I think, and then we finished it, in 77. So we just worked at our own pace until we were ready.
So there was no deadline from the studio or from the producers, like you have to have it ready for X release date.
No, not that I
Wow.
remember, not at all.
Wow.
And, and there was talk about what to call it. Initially it was going to be Anhedonia, and then there were, other iterations. I'm sure someone's documented all those titles. And then it was clear that it was really it had to be Annie Hall. But no, I don't. And this is probably one of the only movies I just had no sense of that we had to rush for anything.
That must have benefited the process, getting to just work and work and work until it really was the best iteration of what it could be.
Yeah, and he Woody did not dawdle. He did a movie a year, if you look at how many, they were relatively controlled budgets, and he just churned them out like crazy. But Annie Hall was different.
And you look at what he made in the immediate aftermath of Annie Hall, Interiors, and then Manhattan. I mean, two of the best films that he ever made, right, right, one after another. I mean, how do you do that? I mean, I find that mind-boggling.
Well, real talent. I think people were concerned about interiors. Should you make interiors right after Annie Hall? But no one envisioned that Annie Hall would be embraced to the degree it was, I think.
Absolutely.
I mean, when one screening, my parents came to Magno's screening room, and as we were driving home in the cab, my mother said, "I don't like that movie." And that's when I knew we probably really had something great.
Why is that? Why is that? Is
No, I think that, just because I think that we could see that people were enjoying the movie, but, the sexuality, the freedom about relationships, the whole thing, I thought that was funny.
That's a
She
really
was
funny
playing a role.
response. And RIP to the wonderful Magno screening room. That was such a great place before it met its demise a couple of years ago.
Was it a few years ago?
Yeah, I think it was probably 5, 6 years ago that it closed. I don't know if it was because of the pandemic or right before the pandemic, but that was a wonderful place, and
Yeah.
it's sad that it's gone.
Yeah, it was great. And it was great to have those kind of previews. Ralph would warm up the audience. Woody would stay in the booth and would just listen from there. But it was a nice way to do it.
You said something interesting I want to zero in on. You said that the scene with Dwayne was almost dropped.
It was dropped for one of the runs
Oh, it
in
was
Magno.
dropped.
Yeah.
How did it come back in? Was it because you fought for it?
Well, I fought for it as hard as I could, given, who I was at that point. Yeah, because we just had an embarrassment of riches, and you would slot things in, and, it was really easy. You'd go back to the cutting room the next day, you'd throw stuff in that had been edited and was ready to go, and you'd line it up and just go back down and try that out. It was great.
Was there anything else that you really fought to keep in the film that you remember, other than the Dwayne sequence?
I think some of the Coney Island stuff was really funny, when he was showing Keaton and Tony Roberts his home, and the dinner with the split screen with the halls, which was one of the few opticals that we did have in the movie. We attempted, Gordon Willis wasn't keen at that point to do a lot of those, so they built the psychiatrist set, and just did it all in one, that kind of thing. Um, there were some things in Coney Island that I think were really rich and funny that were dropped.
Do you remember any of those other than you said that you followed one or two of the classmates home?
Um, well, there was, oh yeah, there was this one scene under the bridge in Coney Island where Woody had been given a condom for emergency use, and then by the time he got to use it, he opened it up and it had turned to dust. And I thought that was pretty funny.
That is really
Everybody had
funny.
their favorites. Everybody had their favorites.
Do you remember what any of Ralph's favorites that he had to
No,
lose? No?
not really. I mean, Ralph, he had his eye on the ball and knew where we had to get to. So I don't remember us saying, "Oh, please," but I really advocated for Dwayne in the bedroom because I thought it was just wonderful.
Was there, I know you said that Woody was pretty merciless when it came to cutting his own work. Was there anything that he really insisted that you keep in or that he really fought? Obviously, he was the boss, but was there anything that he really
Right.
was like, I really, really want this in the film?
I don't think anything was singled out that way. I think he had a much more overall point of view of what was working. I mean, one of the favorite scenes for everybody was the lobster scene in comparison between Keaton and then the other girlfriend, where it was just so flat and it was so ad-libbed and funny between Keaton and Woody that I still can't have lobster and not think about the joke about putting a little dish of butter so he'll run out the other side.
And I love during that sequence when she pokes him with the lobster and then she just busts out laughing. I mean, it's
You just see that it's real.
there's such a naturalism to the performances in this film, and it's something you rarely find in comedies nowadays.
Yeah, because they were really good friends. She came to the cutting room also a couple of times and she was very funny, lying on the floor. I mean, she was just, there was an ease between them, which was great. They talked on the phone often. We were all in one room, so you could hear everything. He had a lot of wisdom that he shared, opinions. He was a very opinionated guy, and he shared a lot of that, and I just soaked that up.
Oh, that must have been such a great environment to be in as a 27-year-old editor,
Fantastic.
just starting off your career. I mean, what a wonderful thing to be able to do
It was.
and to start with. You had said in another interview that you were largely in charge of recutting the film, which is how your credit got bumped up. And you described the process as painful, which I thought was an interesting word. Um,
That's interesting. Uh,
is that
I
correct?
didn't recut the film. I cut it along with Ralph and Woody sitting there. I made the changes, I guess I would.
Yes. I think
That's it.
that yes.
Yeah.
I think
I
that
mean, I didn't do a version of Annie Hall and present it to Ralph or Woody. No.
well
Um,
let me ask you then, was there anything that you remember as being on the border of staying in and then ultimately was cut? Because you had mentioned the Dwayne thing was cut, then ended up making it in. But was there anything that really made it far along in the process, and then for one reason or another needed to be cut, or
hmm.
that was particularly painful to cut because it really felt like it was something that benefited the film, but again, didn't benefit it enough to keep in.
Nothing per se comes to mind like that. I mean, it was more the bits and the clips of things, but no.
Fair enough. Something that really struck me when rewatching this film for the I don't even know how many time I have probably seen this film 15 or 20 times over the course of my life, more than almost any other. But what really amazed me was this film is kind of a tapestry, but it's always completely cohesive. There is always a narrative through line, even though this film ping pongs around, jumps in time, different stories, different characters, this and that. How did you and Ralph make this ping-ponging story completely cohesive while still retaining the kind of a stream of consciousness structure to it? It's an amazing balancing act.
It is. And it took a while to do that. And I think that, I wish I had, sort of kept a diary of the process. I did jot down certain notes along the way, but they were many opinions of Woody's or what he thought about being in the front and things like that. So that was just a side thing. It was, well, what are you looking for, Josh?
But the question was about balancing making a cohesive film with a film that really ping-pongs around and is told kind of stream of consciousness style.
Yeah. Well, I think the stream of consciousness style was always in its DNA. It was just there was so much stuff in there. And then once you knew that this was going to be a relationship film between the two of them, then it was like how much we could slot in to, you know, still keep the focus on Keaton and Woody, but also embellish what his earlier life had been, what was fueling him, because his neurosis was pretty front and center in this movie. And she had a lot to deal with along the way. And it's a romantic comedy, and the couple didn't end up together. That's unusual.
Very unusual. And again, as you and I spoke about yesterday, and earlier before we got on, that's something that's been imitated, that's been replicated in so many films afterwards, so many inferior imitators.
Yes,
But
yes.
this, I mean, this was certainly not the first one, but this is a very notable one that really, yeah, was a rom-com that didn't have the couple end up together.
Yeah, and that was unusual. And it had a kind of frankness and openness about sexuality that I don't also think was, that prevalent at that time.
Absolutely, there's no question about it. It is very frank in its depiction of sexuality and its discussions of it, and those discussions are still relevant today. I mean, watching this film 48 years later, it's like, wow, this really feels, it still feels fresh. It still speaks to
It's
our time.
real,
It's very real.
I
Um,
think that's true.
one of the sequences that I want to dig into with you is the scene when Alfie and Annie are walking on the beach in the Hamptons, and she initially says "la di da," but we don't see her say it. Instead, we see her. It's a POV shot of them looking out at the sunset and walking with the captured with handheld camera. Can you talk about cutting that sequence and putting some of the dialogue off camera? Because that also happens when Annie's driving Alvy back to her apartment, driving like a lunatic, and you
Right.
see what they're seeing out the front windshield, and not seeing them deliver the dialogue.
Right. Well, I think that happens in all films. At a certain point, she had that term la di da. I think she used it quite a bit, and I think that we loved it and wanted to use it more. In the drive home, when he at the end of it, which he says, "We can walk to the curb from here," when they're just getting to know one another. Yeah, I mean, action sequences weren't really the driving force of Annie Hall. At a certain point, there was a kind of awkwardness to some of them. So some of it had to be embellished, I think, with dialogue, which we do all the time. Um, but I mean, the beach scene was covered pretty much in one. So when they turn away, it was easy to insert certain dialogue.
Was that dialogue recorded afterwards, or was
I
that
think so. I think
interesting?
so. Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure if it was recorded afterwards or if the dialogue is overlaid on a POV shot because
Well, I think
the
that was
sequence was
actually
trimmed.
one of the times Keaton came to the cutting room. And, I got to meet her then because I wasn't on set at all. And just to pick up some lines.
Do you remember any other lines off the top of your head that were picked up? It's funny that the La Di Da one was a pickup because it's so iconic now.
Well, I think that Keaton had said la di da, at certain
Okay.
other places in the film. And I think it was just used there, but not really at this point. Uh, I mean, No, specifically, I can't.
What do you remember of her coming to the cutting room?
Well, she was just such a life force. She was amazing. I remember, I don't know if Bobby Greenhut, our producer, production manager, was in the room or whatever, but I remember she was wearing cowboy boots. And he said, those cowboy boots, they cost $150. And it was like, whoa, $150. That was impressive. And she was, she was laughing on the floor and just, she thought the film leader was funny and pretty, and she was just a life force when she came in, and she made everybody kind of perk up and be very happy.
That must have been an energizing presence in the editing in what sounds like an
It
otherwise
was
quiet,
it was
very serene editing room.
that's right, quiet and problem solving, but that was a fun day when she came in. Very different from when Marshall was in. I think he was more concerned. She was just a bundle of energy.
That's wonderful. Speaking of performances, Andrew was wondering, were there any performance issues that you had to work around when shaping this film?
Well, yeah, of course. There were always personality issues.
Oh, no, no, not personality,
Performance
performance.
issues. Yeah. So certain takes were better than others. We had six different responses to Christopher Walken. People liked different ones for different reasons. Ralph liked one, I liked another. We ultimately, Woody would be the decider, or conversation between Ralph and Woody would do it.
Um, I want to circle back. We were just talking about the lobster scene,
Yeah.
which obviously one of the most iconic scenes in this film.
Right.
But the lead into that is the scene between Alvy and Allison, played by Carol Kane, when he's talking about the JFK assassination conspiracy theories. And after that sequence, you cut to the lobster scene.
Right.
How did you go from one to the other? It works so beautifully in the film, but they're two scenes that you wouldn't necessarily think would flow from one to another. How did that come together?
Well, I think we needed I mean, Allison needed to be in the place she was. And then we needed that lobster scene. When I was revisiting Annie Hall recently and screening it, I didn't think that transition was actually the smoothest. But I think that it was just a question of economy and how we were going to fit things in at a certain point. There was The Allison character wasn't that much fun compared to my mind, to the other, kind of relationships, Woody and Tony, and the Los Angeles part, the whole thing. So I think we just decided to go there and went. And given the given the stylistic choices in the movie, you kind of had a lot of freedom.
I agree with you. It may not be the smoothest of transitions,
No.
but what I think it does do is it establishes the style of the film, and it establishes that one scene could be one thing, and the next scene could be something completely and utterly different, and that the film ping-pongs along like that through to its conclusion. And you establish that style very early on. I think it's really to the film's benefit getting the audience used to that ping-ponging style.
I think so too. And we're also following this neurotic character that's, just going through all these emotions and breaking up, coming, the whole thing. It allows you a certain editorial freedom of choice.
Well, speaking of that, I want to dig into a couple of other transitions that I thought were really delightful. There's one where Annie and Alvy are about to make love in the Hamptons, and then you cut to Alvy listening to that terrible comedian who's trying to pitch himself and have
Right.
Alvy write jokes for him. How did those two scenes couple together in the edit? Because they have nothing to do with one another, but they're both wonderful and also introduces that ping-ponging style.
I mean, it was a fantastic scene with that comedian,
That guy
and
is
Woody's
fantastic.
reactions were so good. I mean, I think in one sense it gives you a basis for why he acted the way he did what he had to put up with to sort of be the person he was and why he could be so hard on the people who were around him. And here's a good example of why, because this was his legacy, this was his history.
That is a really brilliant explanation for why those two scenes are coupled together. I never would have I never thought about that before.
Maybe it
Um,
was just my interpretation.
but whatever it is, I love that, and I think that's a great explanation for it. Speaking of the lovemaking scenes, there's another one. I can't remember which one it is. I think it's between Annie and Alvy, and he says, "You're not going to believe this," and then it cuts to whatever the next scene is, like mid sentence. I'm blanking on which one of those scenes it is, but
Ew.
it was such an unusual. It was like, oh, I wonder what he's going to say, and then boom, it moves into the next scene. Um, but just also
Was it
another.
the one where she gets up when she's smoking weed and it wasn't that where he's wondering about why she always needs to smoke weed before she makes love.
I don't know. I can't remember if it was that one or I don't know. But another. We're really on a tear here with the lovemaking scenes. But there was another one where you have Alfie and his other wife, and she gets disrupted by the siren, and then he goes, I'm gonna go take another in a series of cold showers, and then it cuts to Tony and
Oh,
Woody.
Janet Margolin,
Yes,
yeah.
Janet Margolin, and then it cuts to um, a sign that says showers, and Woody and Tony coming out of the showers going to play tennis, where he initially meets
Right,
Annie. I mean,
right.
was that a scripted transition, or is that something that
I
you and
think
Ralph
it
thought of?
was. I think that was a
Okay,
scripted transition to my mind.
okay, because it was like if that was not a scripted transition, that is an incredibly great way to
It's
join two
very
scenes
hard.
together.
Somebody has when you look for a script of Annie Hall now, it's pretty much just a copy of the movie. The original scripts. I mean, I have some script notes from Annie Hall, but and a few other things from the cutting room. But yeah, it's very hard to know original script or editorial or whatever.
Well, I would love to read that. I would love to read whatever the original script was someday, wherever that
Wherever
exists,
it may be.
wherever it may be. Do you remember any sections of the film that really stayed intact over the course of the entire edit? Or was everything kind of blown apart and put back together again?
I think everything was really blown apart and put back and transposed and moved different places.
Okay, got it. Another moment I want to ask you about that I've always been curious about was when Diane says, "Will it change my wife?" And then he goes, "Will it change my wife?" And then they have a whole conversation about it. And then she refocuses back to whatever she was talking about. Was that an ad lib? Was that a mistake that you guys
No, I
just
don't think so. I think that was
really?
yes, I think so. I mean, it may have been in one of the takes, but I mean that was the whole kitchen scene with the groceries and she's talking about her therapy. Um, well, since I hadn't read the script, I'm not absolutely sure.
It seemed like a really funny ad lib, but that's interesting that you're saying that it may
Well,
not.
I mean, it's sort of like the lobster scene, right? You could see clearly that they were ad-libbing a lot of that. And so it may well have been, but once we saw, I mean, it was great. And it was also illuminating of their relationship. He was quite deprecating to her at times.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to now switch gears and go into the end of the film, which you said it changed over the course of the process. The final montage where you hear Woody's voiceover, and then he talks about but we need the eggs. You have that beautiful montage of different moments of Annie and Alvy's relationship. Where in the process did that come along?
That was towards the end when we were trying to come up with an ending. And it was a conversation between Ralph and Woody. And I think it's been and established. I mean, it was nice to be able to use her singing for that because it was going to be a bittersweet ending. And the recalling of these moments, they talked about, what they might be, and Sandy Morse pulled these clips, and they were assembled, and it just seemed to sit really well. I mean, the eggs was done ad lib in a a recording booth. Woody came up with that just at the end. And it's used over O'Neill's when they're standing on the sidewalk and then she crosses the street. So it was a combination of things, but I think finally doubling back on the bittersweet relationship was something that really what came at the end of the process.
And that voiceover, that now very, very famous voiceover was just an ad lib?
Yes, he did that in the booth at Magno.
Oh
Yep.
my gosh.
Yes, he came up with that there.
I had read that it was done 2 hours before a test screening. Is that correct?
I don't think so,
Okay.
but no, I don't. I don't believe that was the case. I think it was done as the end because it was a struggle to figure out how to end it. Hence, let's reprise some of the moments between them. I mean, now it's so used so much, in film. But I think it felt kind of new to us at a certain point and also was solving some big problems.
Was it immediately when you put in that montage over Diane singing and then his voiceover, was it immediately apparent that that was the ending for the film, that this now finally worked?
I think it was pretty obvious. Yes.
Do you remember the last time that you screened the film before you locked picture?
Well, we screened really, I think our previews we didn't have the ending. He hadn't done the ending that we had now because he had to bring the crew back and write it and bring the crew back and write it. So I don't remember a final screening per se. No.
It's amazing when you look at it now. I mean, this like 93-minute piece of perfection, just how satisfyingly it ends. I mean, I think one of the things that everybody remembers from this film is that bittersweet ending. Um, but it's so wonderful. I mean, there really is something wonderful about it. Yes, there's a little bit of bitterness to it, but it really is such a lovely, satisfying ending. You're not left wanting more.
Right. But it took a lot of tries to get there. And that's, I think, the lesson of the post-production of Annie Hall. You have to just keep trying and doing different things. And then finally, if you have enough time and you think it through, you'll land on it. And the guess is all paid off, as Ralph said.
Well, you just led me into my final question for the evening. You've cut films for the past 48 years since Annie Hall was released, and you've cut again so many wonderful ones over that time. What did you take from Annie Hall that you've employed on subsequent films?
Well, I think that the recognizing the elasticity of things and not being locked into this is the way we saw it and this is the way we want it, not forcing, a square peg into a round hole, letting the movie and the film lead you and tell you what it is, because ultimately that's the lesson of the post-production for Annie Hall. The film led us and the filmmakers to where it ended up, and it was very different from where it began. And that's I try and take that on to every film. It doesn't always work, but it's it's the best lesson ever.
Absolutely, and look at the film that look at the film that it initially birthed. I mean, this film won the Oscar for Best Picture. You and Ralph won a BAFTA award for your work on this. I mean,
Yes,
and
that was
this film changed cinema. I mean, there's no other way to put it. This film really changed cinema. It's remarkable.
yeah, it's great.
And that's why we're talking about it 48 years later. Wendy, this has been an amazing hour. I cannot tell you how much I've enjoyed listening to your insights and exploring this film with you. Your recollection of cutting this film is truly remarkable. So, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us this evening.
You're welcome. It was fun to do it.
Thank you to everybody in the audience for being here, and to those in our encores, thank you for joining us as well. A quick announcement as to what we have upcoming. Our next Q&A will be in a few weeks from now on October 14th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 o'clock Pacific. We have filmmaker Ang Lee, editor Tim Squires, and cinematographer Peter Pau joining us for the 25th anniversary of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Tickets are at picturehouse441.com. We are at Picturehouse441 on social media. Good night, everybody. Wendy, thank you again. This has been such a pleasure.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.